Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
This week on Global Print, I'm going to talk about the visit of Russia's National Security Advisor Nikolay Patrushev to Delhi last week. Now, some of this has already come out in the press, along with the head of the CIA, Nicholas Burns, and the head of the MI6, which is Britain's spy agency, Richard Moore. All three gentlemen were in Delhi last week and met India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, along with Prime Minister Modi and, of course, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. And all of you would ask the question why they have all come to Delhi, as I'm asking. And the short word is Afghanistan. But of course, there's much more than meets the eye. But before we go into the details, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe, pay just a little bit for the Print's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. So click on the join button, pay rupees 159. It's very little money, but as a subscriber, you will avail an array of benefits that other non-subscribers don't have. So click on the join button, or on the link to subscribe is also available in the description of this video, both for an international audience as well as for a domestic one. Now, back to my column Global Print, in which I talk about the visit of Nikolay Patrushev to Delhi last week. He met Ajit Doval, and the significance of this meeting is actually manyfold, and some of it has been overlooked in the national press. So here I'm going to sort of try and make you understand what the Nikolay Patrushev's visit was all about. Now, on top of the agenda, of course, was Afghanistan. But let's look at why Patrushev came to Delhi and how this happened. First of all, my information is that it was the Russian side that sought the meeting with Ajit Doval. Now, Mr. Doval is the National Security Advisor. He's not the External Affairs Minister, who, as you know, is Mr. Jaishankar. So the fact that, you can argue that Mr. Patrushev is the National Security Advisor, so he will seek the meeting with his Indian counterpart, who is Mr. Doval. But behind the scenes, it seems a little apparent that the Russia story is now increasingly going to be dealt with by the National Security Advisor's office, so which means Mr. Doval and his office, the National Security Council Secretariat. Now, does this mean that this is an undermining, perhaps, of the Ministry of External Affairs? I would not go at all as far to say that. But we will watch, of course, and read the tea leaves as they come over the next few weeks and months. So the first point that I'm making in this video, that it was the Russian side that sought the meeting with Ajit Doval. Now, you would ask yourself, why are the Russians coming to India, especially when in the aftermath of the Afghan outcome, in the aftermath of the Taliban taking Kabul? The Russians have clearly been on the winning side. We've seen how the Russian Special Envoy Zamir Kabulov made good with the Pakistanis, improved Russia's relationship with Pakistan quite considerably, because he knew that the Pakistanis had a very, very close relationship with the Taliban. And if Russia, which is a neighbor but one, and very much part of the extended troika in the Afghan meetings. You remember also that the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, had a very bitter 10-year-long experience from 1979 to 1989. When they exited, bloodied and bowed, I've used this phrase a few times before, but I can't find a better one to describe the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. So Zamir Kabulov, biting his tongue, his leadership tells him to reach out to the Pakistanis. You will also remember here that the Pakistanis at the time, with the help of the mighty United States, fought the godless Soviets in Afghanistan and threw them out. So Pakistani fighters killing Soviet army officers. The Russians are unlikely to forget that, especially the President Vladimir Putin, who was during the Soviet period and subsequently very much part of Russia's spy agency, the KGB. So Zamir Kabulov now being told by the Russian leadership, make nice with Pakistan because they have influence, significant influence over the Taliban, which is what he does. So the Russians are on the winning side And we see how the Russians have retained their embassy in Kabul. So then in that case, if Russia is on the winning side, if Russia has improved its relationship vastly with Pakistan, why is Nikolay Patrushev, such an influential person in the Russian leadership, coming to India? And the answer is as follows. It seems that the Russians realize that now that the Pakistanis have been able to install their government, and I will say within quotes, their government, meaning people in the Taliban that the Pakistani military or the military establishment or the ISI, and we saw how Faiz Hamid was in Kabul a couple of weeks ago to broker a new government. So now that the Pakistani ISI has been able to establish its government, Russia understands that the problem might be much more serious than it is. I mean, it is always understood that. Remember, I just told you that Russia will not forget that Pakistani fighters killed Soviet army officers in that war between 1979 to 1989. And big powers have long memories. So in the second chapter, which is now unfolding, which is now beginning, in this new chapter, in the wake of the Taliban taking Kabul, the Russians are reaching out to their good old friends, India. And the relationship between Patrushev and Doval is now going to, I believe, get stronger. The third point I'd like to make in this video is that it is now widely acknowledged by a large number of security and foreign policy analysts like Christine Fair of Georgetown University, and you should watch my interview with her as well as with Indian diplomats, retired Indian diplomats who know the subject well, whether it's India's former ambassadors, Jayant Prasad, Rakesh Sood, Amar Sinha, Gautam Mukhopadhyay, as well as India's former permanent representative to the United Nations, Saeed Akbaruddin. And please do watch the several interviews that I have done with all these gentlemen. All of them have said one thing, which is that India has lost this particular battle for Afghanistan and that Pakistan has won. But if Pakistan has won, and we see very clearly that the Pakistanis have been able to install not just the Taliban, of course, but their men in the Taliban, for example, Sirajuddin Haqqani of the Haqqani networks, and I've told you before how the Haqqani network is a very anti-India terrorist or insurgent group. So if the Pakistanis have been able to have won this particular battle for Afghanistan and India has lost, why are the Russians reaching out to India? You don't reach out to a losing power, surely, or somebody who's lost this particular round. But I think that's what big powers do. They understand that things never remain static, that there is always a continuum in international realpolitik. So today India may be down and Pakistan may be up, but who knows? India is a big power with 1.3 billion population, the largest country in South Asia, certainly in this region. As the weeks and months go by, how are the Taliban going to run their own country if they're not able to make relations with other powers besides China? So the Russians are looking far ahead, and they understand that India, although it has not been able to leverage its power in this particular battle for Afghanistan, it's not going away, and that India's power will not be diminished. And therefore, Russia is playing an early game, which is to re-establish an older relationship with India. Now, perhaps that would push you to ask the question, has the India-Russia relationship become so bad? And I think what has happened in the last few years is that as India reached out to the US, as India became a partner in the Quad, which you know is India, US, Australia, and Japan, these four Pacific nations, which basically were a counter to China, it forgot that it had older ties, older friendships like the one with Russia. And the pity is that India has been able to, during the long Cold War, has been able to maneuver itself through these tortuous relationships. You know, on the one hand, India signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with the former Soviet Union in 1971. You know that story. But subsequently, India was also and before that. Now, the Soviets also had very good relations with Pakistan at one point in the 1960s. So India, this very young country, was forced to maneuver between various relationships if it had to establish its presence on the international arena. So today, unfortunately, what has happened in the last few years is that a perception has been built. Now, on the ground, the reality is different because India and Russia do have a very strong defense relationship. But the economic relationship, for example, is really terrible. It's nothing like what India has with other countries, including the US. So there is an effort now to rekindle that relationship between India and Russia. So you would also ask, what is in it for India to rekindle that old relationship? Remember, I'm not saying that India has to choose the US over Russia or choose Russia over the US. India, as a regional power, which it is trying to be, wants to be able to have good friendships with all countries, especially with all the big powers. Right now, there is a problem with the Chinese because they're still sitting on your territory, or what you believe is your territory, in Ladakh. So the question, and which brings me to my fourth point, what is in it for India to rekindle its old relationship with Russia? I will argue that, first of all, Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council, like the US, China, Great Britain, and France, of course, which in itself is important to be able to maintain a good and steadfast relationship, despite the fact that in the last several weeks and months we have seen at the UN, and India is a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council this year and the next, and in August it was the president of the Security Council. We have seen that both Russia and China abstain from resolutions that the Indians put forward. So you can get very upset about that and say, hey, the Russians did not reciprocate your initiative. But I think in international realpolitik, there is no place to be upset and certainly no place to be angry. So the fact remains, Russia is a permanent member of the P5 of the UN Security Council, and you must maintain good ties with a country like that. Second of all, remember that Russia's influence with the Central Asian states remains very, very strong. Despite the fact that the five stans, that the five Central Asia countries, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, the five stans, some of these countries have very weak political systems. They broke up, they became independent in 1991 when the Soviet Union broke up. And in these last 20 odd years, they have not been able to very successfully make the transition to democratic regimes. Russia, of course, is a bit different because it's such a large nation. And although it is, you can argue whether it's a democracy or not, and I will leave that argument for another time. But today, Russian President Vladimir Putin is a very, very strong, a very powerful, and a very popular president, may I add. You can argue that he's been around also for more than 25 years in one position or the other, prime minister, president. But he is there and he's been elected, and the people of Russia want him. So to come back to Russia's influence with the Central Asian states, that remains very strong. Tajikistan, for example, which has a large border with Afghanistan, it is a Russian armored corps that defends that border and has since the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991. Today as well, that border is defended by the Russian armored corps. Similarly, in the other countries that have borders with Afghanistan, with Uzbekistan, for example, as well as with Turkmenistan, these regimes, some of them not so strong, their political system is still quite weak. Russia maintains a very, very strong influence over these nations. So Russia's huge fear is that if the Taliban expands its influence and its power across not just Afghanistan, but it sends insurgents into these neighboring Central Asian countries, then that will have not just an impact on the Central Asian nations itself, but in the deep underbelly of the Russian nation. And some of these republics in southern Russia are predominantly Muslim. Chechnya, for example. The Russian leadership, in fact, has never forgotten that when the Taliban was in power from 1996 to 2001, it recognized Chechnya as an independent republic. And it was Vladimir Putin, when he comes to power in 1999 in Russia, that he fights the Second Chechnya War. Of course, thousands of people are killed on both sides, but Russia is able to establish its control once again over Chechnya. So there are a lot of things in common between India and Russia, I will argue. And if India wants to revive, I think that's the key word. If India wants to revive, restore, revamp, reimagine its own destiny, which is of a country with a unique civilization, not aggressive, but wants to reach out to other nations in the region, for example, in Central Asia and of course in Afghanistan, then one of the key players that it must revamp its relationship with is Russia. Remember too, and this is where I end, Russia is not going to send somebody to the inaugural ceremony of the Taliban government, which in fact has been postponed. So the tea leaves are fresh, ready, they're brewing. We will be reading them as they come over the next few days and weeks, and I will bring you the latest on what's happening on the international front. Thank you so much for watching this video, and do read my column, Global Print, in the Print website.